If you were to somehow gather up all the atoms that you physically possessed exactly 10 years ago and just like put them in a pile on the floor, you wouldn't even be able to build a single finger of a body you're sitting in right now.
Right. Yeah, they're just gone.
Literally gone. The biological material that made up, you a decade ago has been completely exhaled, shed, excreted, just scattered across the globe.
It's completely wild to think about.
So, I mean, I have to ask you, the listener, who is the you that has supposedly been sitting here this whole time?
Yeah.
Because if someone asks you who you are, your first instinct is probably to point to your chest, give your name, maybe list your job.
Or talk about your family background, right?
Exactly. But if that physical vehicle you're pointing to is, well, an entirely different biological entity than the one you inhabited just 10 years ago, that whole standard answer starts to look incredibly fragile.
It really forces an immediate epistemological crisis, doesn't it? Because we completely rely on the continuity of our identity just to function in society.
Oh, for sure.
Like, we just assume identity is this fixed, stable coordinate on a map. But the second you apply any actual scrutiny to it, biological, psychological, or physical, that coordinate just dissolves.
And dissolving that coordinate is exactly our mission today. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a big topic.
It is massive. Because today we are taking a stack of notes, writings, and these just profound philosophical frameworks developed by Joe Bandra. And our objective is to systematically dismantle the standard everyday conception of human identity.
Which is no small task.
Not at all. We are exploring Bandra's incredibly rigorous argument that to actually understand yourself, you have to fundamentally stop viewing yourself as a person, like as a discrete noun interacting with a world of other nouns.
Right, because Bandra argues you must instead recognize yourself as a metathetical principle.
A metathetical principle, which, I mean, is a phrase that requires a lot of unpacking.
Oh, absolutely. But it is arguably the most liberating intellectual shift a person can make. Metathetical implies this transposition, a complete structural reorganization of how we relate to reality itself.
So our roadmap for you today is going to start right at the boundary of your skin. We're going to examine the physical illusions of the human body and the actual astrophysics of the stardust you are currently borrowing.
And then from there, we're going to move inward. We'll peel back the layers of human awareness to locate the observer behind the eyes.
Right. And finally, we'll arrive at the ultimate synthesis. We're going to look at how Bandra's concept of humans as a principle serves as this missing link between quantum mechanics, global mysticism, and classical philosophy.
Revealing how you are not just this isolated organism trapped inside the universe.
Right. You are the universe organizing itself to witness its own existence.
Okay.
So let's start with the hardware. Because to accept that we are a principle, we have to categorically prove that we are not a fixed physical object.
Yeah, because our foundational assumption is physical permanence. Our sensory apparatus is, frankly, pretty slow. So when we look in the mirror, we just perceive this solid, enduring statue.
But Bandra's notes highlight this brilliant, highly relatable anecdote to kind of fracture this assumption. He writes about attending a high school reunion after 40 years.
Right, so he walks into this gymnasium.
Yeah, expecting to see his peers, the people whose faces he had literally memorized when he was a teenager.
But those people simply did not exist anymore. I mean, the physical hardware had undergone a complete morphological overhaul.
Exactly. Hairlines had receded or just vanished entirely. Bone structures appeared completely different as faces aged, and body mass had shifted dramatically.
The biological entities of those teenagers had essentially been wiped from the earth, and they were replaced by these older, entirely different physical forms.
Yet the crux of Bandra's observation is this paradox of recognition. Because despite the fact that almost no original biological material remained,
Right, none of the original cells.
and the architectural shape of the faces had completely changed, there was still this unmistakable familiar presence behind their eyes. He could look across the room and know intuitively, oh, that is the exact same presence I knew 40 years ago.
Which logically demands an explanation. Because if the physical form is entirely different but the core identity remains, well, the physical form cannot be the locus of the identity.
And biology backs this up completely. The human body is not a static object. It is a localized zone of continuous thermodynamic activity.
Let's actually look at the mechanics of that turnover, because it's staggering when you move past the basic trivia of it.
Yeah, break it down for us.
So on a cellular level, Apoptosis, which is programmed, cell death, and cellular division, are happening by the millions every single second. Like the epidermal layer of your skin, that is entirely replaced every 2 to 4 weeks.
Which means the skin you had a month ago is literally dust floating around your house now.
Exactly. And your red blood cells have a lifespan of about 120 days before your spleen and liver just break them down and recycle the iron. The epithelial cells lining your stomach, which have to endure this highly acidic environment, they turn over every few days.
Because the acid would just eat them otherwise.
Right. And even your skeletal structure, which we perceive as the absolute most solid, rigid part of our anatomy, undergoes constant remodeling. You have osteoclasts breaking down old bone and osteoblasts forming new bone constantly.
So every decade or so, you essentially have a completely new skeleton.
Exactly. You're walking around on entirely different bones.
So we're really less like statues and more like a standing wave in a river. Like if you look at a river flowing over a submerged rock, you'll see a waveform on the surface.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
And that wave stays in the exact same spot. It holds the exact same shape, and you can point to it and say, there is the wave. But the water making up that wave is changing every millisecond. The wave isn't an object. It's a pattern that matter flows through.
We are biological standing waves. That is a highly precise way to frame it. You are an anatomical pattern, and the material flowing through the pattern is completely temporary.
Right. And when we look at where that material actually comes from, the source material introduces this observation from the physicist Richard Feynman. And this completely scales the concept up from biology to astrophysics.
Feynman's observation is amazing because it shatters any localized sense of self. The atoms currently flowing through your biological standing wave did not originate on Earth.
Not at all.
No, the mechanics of the universe dictate that the heavy elements required for biological life can only be forged in the extreme thermodynamic furnaces of dying stars.
Right, because if we trace the causality back, the universe began with primarily hydrogen and a bit of helium.
Just light elements.
Yeah, and those coalesced under gravity to form the first stars. In the cores of those stars, the immense pressure and heat caused nuclear fusion. So hydrogen fused into helium, helium fused into carbon, carbon into oxygen, and so on, just moving up the periodic table.
But to get the iron that is currently carrying oxygen through your bloodstream right now, you need an event even more violent than standard fusion. You literally need a supernova.
That is just wild to think about. The iron in our blood is the direct result of a massive star collapsing under its own gravity and detonating. An explosion so powerful it briefly outshines entire galaxies.
Yeah, and that specific iron was forged in just a fraction of a second during that stellar death. It was blasted out into the vacuum of space where it drifted for billions of years.
Just drifting.
Just drifting until it was caught in the accretion disk that would eventually form our solar system.
And it didn't just stop there. That iron became part of the cooling Earth. It was locked inside rock, maybe eroded by ancient oceans, taken up by the root systems of prehistoric ferns.
Consumed by early mammals.
Right. Returned to the soil and cycled through millions of biological iterations before ending up on your dinner plate and subsequently inside your actual hemoglobin. The calcium fortifying your bones, the carbon in your DNA, the oxygen you're inhaling right now, they are all ancient cosmic artifacts.
Building on that, the physical body really starts to look less like a personal possession and more like a temporary cosmic mosaic.
It does. However, I have to push back on Bandra here, or at least play devil's advocate for you, the listener, because understanding the astrophysics of nucleosynthesis is, fascinating. But from a purely subjective standpoint, the illusion of ownership is incredibly persistent.
What do you mean?
Well, if I stub my toe, it doesn't feel like a cosmic mosaic is experiencing localized trauma. It feels like my toe hurts. The central nervous system creates this undeniable boundary condition that says, this is me, and the table I just kicked is not me. So how do we reconcile this subjective feeling of ownership with this objective reality of biological turnover?
That's a very fair point, and the persistence of the illusion is precisely why Bandra's framework is necessary. To address your pushback, the sensation of pain is a localized data processing event. It's required for the survival of the organism.
Right. It keeps you from kicking the table again.
Exactly. But experiencing data from a specific location does not equate to ownership of that location. Consider Bandra's argument regarding renting versus owning atomic structure.
Oh, he'll lay that out.
Nature temporarily organizes these ancient atoms into a highly complex, self-regulating, dissipative structure. a human being. The nervous system is part of that structure, and it's designed to protect the integrity of the pattern.
But the atoms themselves don't care.
No, the atoms are entirely indifferent to you. Nature will inevitably dismantle your specific pattern, break the bonds, and return every single atom back to the biosphere.
So if we follow that logic, claiming ownership over your body is like dipping a bucket into the ocean, pointing to the water inside, and claiming you possess it.
That's a perfect analogy.
The water takes the shape of the bucket temporarily, but it remains the ocean's water. The body, then, is not a noun. It is a verb.
Precisely. It is an event. The body is a continuous metabolic event unfolding in space-time. And when you recognize that the physical form is merely this temporary process of cosmic recycling, the anchor of your identity has to detach from the physical realm.
Which brings us to the most urgent question of this deep dive. If the physical hardware is a transient event, what is the software running the system? What is the irreducible element that remains when the cellular material just flows away?
Right, which takes us into the second phase of our discussion, peeling back the I am. Because the instinct, once we abandon the body, is to retreat into the mind.
Oh, absolutely. We think, okay, I am not my stardust skeleton, but I am my personality. I am my memories. I am my political beliefs, my sense of humor, my neuroses.
But Bandra applies the exact same ruthless scrutiny to our psychological layers. And they fail the test of permanence just as quickly as the body does.
Yeah, if identity requires a constant, the mind is the worst place to look.
Exactly. I mean, your beliefs today are radically different from what they were 15 years ago. Your emotional state fluctuates constantly. You cycle through frustration, joy, apathy, and focus, all within a single afternoon.
And your sociological roles are entirely situational too. You act completely differently as a parent than you do as an employee or a friend or a child.
Even memories, which we treat as the secure vault of our identity, are notoriously unstable. Neuroscience shows us that every time we recall a memory, we literally physically reconstruct it in the brain.
Often altering the details in the process, right? We are constantly editing the narrative of who we are.
So the psychological profile is also a flowing river. But amid the flux of thoughts, the shifting of beliefs, and the alteration of memories, Bandra points out that there is one phenomenological constant.
And what is that?
From your earliest conscious childhood memory to your current state right now, there is an underlying hum of existence. The raw, unfiltered, unqualified sense of simply being. The feeling of, I am.
And the source material highlights a fascinating linguistic reality about the I am. It operates as the foundational base layer upon which all identity is built. It is the order of operations for existence.
Right.
Before you can attach any predicates to yourself, before you can declare I am a successful lawyer, or I am an anxious person, or I am an aging father, you must first establish the base reality. You have to assert I am.
The predicates, the adjectives, and the nouns you attach to the I am are just the variables. They swap out depending on the day, the year, or the context, but the subject, the pure I am, never changes.
It is the unconditioned awareness that serves as the backdrop for all conditioned experiences. And to really isolate what this awareness is, Bandra employs a rigorous method of phenomenological reduction. He draws heavily on the distinction between the observer and the observed.
This is where we have to be intellectually surgical. The rule of the observer and the observed is fundamentally about subject-object relationships. If you can observe a phenomenon, you logically cannot be the phenomenon you are observing.
Because the observer has to exist prior to and independent of the object being observed.
Let's apply that practically. You can look at your hand. Because your hand is an object of your observation, you are not your hand. The observer is seeing the hand.
We can accept that pretty easily with the physical body. But Bandra forces us to apply this inward to the psychological realm.
Right. If you close your eyes and pay attention, you can observe a thought arising in your mind. You can literally notice yourself thinking about what to make for dinner.
And if you can observe the thought arising, playing out, and passing away, you cannot be the thought. The thought is an object appearing in your awareness.
The exact same mechanism applies to emotions. You can feel a surge of anger, and you can observe that anger burning in your chest. Because you are the witness to the anger, you are not the anger itself.
You are the silent, spacious awareness in which the emotion of anger is temporarily appearing. Let's use a modern analogy here to really crystallize this for you, rather than the classic sky and clouds metaphor.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think of a computer's operating system. The thoughts, the memories, the personality traits, the bodily sensations, those are all software applications running on the desktop.
Right, like apps.
Exactly. Sometimes you have the anxiety app running and it's taking up a lot of RAM. Sometimes the nostalgia app is open. Sometimes the physical pain app is alerting you. But the awareness, the pure I am, is the underlying operating system kernel.
I love that. It doesn't have a visual interface.
No, it isn't an app. It is the invisible environment that allows the applications to run, be seen, and be experienced. The apps can crash, be uninstalled, or be upgraded, but the operating system kernel remains the silent witness to all the activity.
That analogy perfectly sets up the most radical paradigm shift in Bandra's entire framework. He calls it the big reversal.
The big reversal.
Because historically, our scientific and cultural assumption is that awareness is a localized byproduct of the brain. We assume the physical body exists first, it develops a complex neural network, and that neural network somehow generates a little personal bubble of awareness.
We believe the operating system is a feature of the hardware. We think we are a person who happens to have awareness, like it's an accessory to our humanity.
Exactly. But Bandra flips the epistemology entirely. Because your body, your brain, your thoughts, and your entire life story are all objects that are observed. They must all exist downstream from awareness.
Right.
Therefore, you are not a person having awareness. You are awareness appearing as a person.
I really want to stress test that reversal, because it is massively counterintuitive to how we navigate the world.
It definitely takes a minute to process.
Yeah, because if I am awareness appearing as a person, that implies the awareness is fundamental and the personhood is secondary. It means the John or Sarah that I think I am is just a complex bundle of sensations, memories, and physical traits floating inside a boundless field of knowing.
Yes, and notice what happens when you try to find the self as an object. When philosophers or neuroscientists try to locate the core I in the brain, they find language centers, memory storage, motor cortexes.
But they never find a little homunculus.
Right, there is no tiny self sitting in a control room. That is because the self is not an object to be found. The I cannot see itself. The scale cannot weigh itself. You are that by which all things are known, but you cannot be known as a thing.
Which means the pure presence that is listening to the sound of my voice right now, that invisible, silent observer behind your eyes, is the exact same pure presence that existed when you were a child.
The biological hardware changed, the psychological software upgraded, but the I am remained completely untouched.
And realizing this forces us into the third major section of Bandra's philosophy. We've deconstructed the body into a cosmic event, and we've isolated the true self as pure, objectless awareness. But how do we bridge those two realities?
How does dead, ancient stardust suddenly wake up, look in a mirror, and say, I am?
Right, you are describing the hard problem of consciousness. Because science is unparalleled in its ability to map physical mechanisms. We can trace the precise biochemical cascades that cause a muscle to contract.
We can map the action potentials of neurons firing across synapses.
But science hits an absolute brick wall when it tries to explain how those physical, objective mechanisms give rise to subjective, qualitative experience.
How does the firing of a neuron suddenly feel like the color red, or the taste of an apple, or the grief of losing a loved one?
Materialism assumes that if you just stack enough dead matter together in complex enough patterns, eventually the lights will turn on. But there is no mathematical equation that connects mass and velocity to subjective awareness.
And this explanatory gap is exactly where Joe Bandra introduces his central thesis. He posits that if we attempt to understand consciousness by treating humans as isolated biological machines, we will forever be stuck.
So what's the alternative?
Instead, we must understand the human being as a metaphetical principle.
Let's decode that, because the word principle does a lot of heavy lifting here. When I think of a principle, I think of physics or mathematics, like the principle of gravity or the laws of thermodynamics.
And that is exactly the conceptual framework Bandra wants you to adopt. Consider the nature of a principle like gravity. It is completely invisible. You cannot measure the volume of gravity. You cannot paint it red. You cannot put it in a glass jar.
It has no material substance.
Yet this invisible, formless principle dictates the architecture of the entire cosmos. It tells planets how to orbit and stars how to form. A principle is an invisible organizing intelligence.
So Bandra is suggesting that awareness itself operates identically to a fundamental principle of nature. It cannot be seen, it has no physical dimensions, but it is the invisible prerequisite for anything to be known or experienced.
He goes even further than just calling it a principle. He He refers to it as the divine creative principle.
Yeah.
And we need to be very precise here. This is not an anthropomorphic deity.
Right, not a guy in the sky.
Exactly. It is not an entity with a personality making arbitrary decisions. The divine creative principle, in Bandra's terminology, is the underlying non-dual intelligence of existence itself. It is the fundamental reality from which the physical universe, the stardust, the planets, the biology, spontaneously manifests.
If the universe is the hardware, the divine creative principle is the invisible laws of mathematics and physics, combined with the pure awareness that allows the system to experience itself. It brings order from chaos, structuring hydrogen atoms into stellar nurseries, refining heavy elements, and ultimately organizing biological life into sensory organs capable of self-reflection.
Exactly. The intelligence that regulates the division of your cells right now is not generated by your ego. You don't consciously tell your liver how to function.
I definitely don't.
The intelligence running your body is the exact same intelligence regulating the orbits of the planets. It is one continuous principle.
I do need to challenge the utility of this, though. Intellectually, mapping awareness to a universal principle makes a certain elegant sense. But if I'm driving to work, stuck in gridlock traffic, stressed about a mortgage, how does viewing myself as a metaphetical principle, rather than an isolated human, actually alter my reality?
That's a fair question.
Doesn't this risk becoming a semantic game that sounds profound but does nothing to alleviate the friction of daily life?
That is probably the most important pushback you can offer, because if this is just philosophical trivia, it is totally useless.
Right.
The utility lies in the complete collapse of existential isolation. Think about it. The root cause of almost all psychological suffering is the belief that you are a fragile, separate ego, locked inside a bag of skin, thrown into a hostile universe that is trying to kill you.
You perceive yourself as an alien inside a world of indifferent matter. The ultimate us versus the universe mentality.
Right. But if you understand that you are not a separate object, but rather a localized expression of the divine creative principle, the entire paradigm of hostility vanishes. Let's avoid the standard wave and ocean metaphor and look at something more structural.
Okay, like what?
Like a mycelial network in a forest.
I like this. A fungal network.
If you walk through a forest, you might see hundreds of individual mushrooms poking through the soil. From above the ground, they look like completely separate, isolated entities. They have different shapes, they are separated by distance, and they eventually decay individually.
But if you dig beneath the soil,
You discover the mycelial network, a vast interconnected web of microscopic fungal threads. The mushrooms are not separate organisms. They are just the temporary fruiting bodies of a single, massive, invisible intelligence that spans the entire forest floor.
so human beings are the fruiting bodies of the universe.
Precisely. You appear separate because of your localized physical coordinates and your localized sensory inputs. But you are inextricably woven into the underlying network. You are the invisible principle taking temporary biological form.
Which means the universe isn't just an environment you happen to live in.
No.
The universe is what you are. Through your specific nervous system, the universe is gathering data. Through your eyes, the universe is looking at its own stars. The creator is experiencing the creation from a localized vantage point.
That is it, exactly.
That is an incredibly profound realization. It reframes everyday existence entirely. Traffic isn't happening to me. I am part of the complex friction of a universe experiencing itself.
It totally shifts your baseline anxiety.
And what provides so much weight to Bandra's framework is that he isn't inventing this out of thin air. As we move into the final major phase of our deep dive, what the outline calls the universal chorus, we realize that this concept is the ultimate open secret of human history.
Yeah, the source material provides a stunning synthesis here. It demonstrates that Bandra's specific articulation of the divine creative principle is actually the exact same truth that every major spiritual tradition, scientific discipline, and philosophical school has been trying to communicate.
They're all just using the specific vocabulary of their era.
Exactly.
Let's start with the spiritual translation matrix, because bridging modern metaphysical language with ancient religious texts requires deep analytical work. How does Judeo-Christian theology, which we typically associate with a highly personalized, separate creator God, map onto the idea of a universal underlying principle?
Well, when you look past the superficial anthropomorphic readings of the text and actually examine the deep theology, the mapping is incredibly direct. In the Hellenistic Jewish tradition and early Christianity, you have the concept of the logos, or the word.
Right, like the Gospel of John.
Yes, it begins. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But logos in ancient Greek doesn't mean a spoken sound. It translates to the divine reason, the ordering principle, the invisible pattern that gives structure to chaos.
It is the mathematics of reality. It's the intelligence of the system.
Exactly. Similarly, the concept of Sophia, or divine wisdom, represents the feminine aspect of God's intelligence woven into the fabric of nature. And when you look at the deep mystics of the Christian tradition, figures like Meister Eckhart, Thomas Merton, or the author of The Cloud of Unknowing, they explicitly reject the idea of God as a being sitting in the sky.
They utilize apophatic theology, right, or the via negativa.
Yes, which attempts to describe God by what God is not.
Because to define God as an object would limit God.
Precisely. They define God as the ground of being, not a being among beings, but the underlying invisible principle by which anything exists at all. When Jesus says, "I and the Father are one," the mystical interpretation is not that one specific biological human is uniquely divine.
It is the ultimate realization of the human ego becoming entirely transparent to the underlying divine creative principle.
Yes, it is the fruiting body recognizing its connection to the mycelial network. And we see this even more explicitly in Eastern traditions.
Hinduism, particularly the Vedanta philosophy derived from the Upanishads, seems to have engineered this exact framework thousands of years ago. They differentiate between Brahman and Atman.
Yes, and this is crucial to understanding Bandra. Brahman is the ultimate, unchanging, infinite principle of reality. It is the formless source of all phenomena. Atman is the localized sense of self, the pure awareness residing within the individual.
And the foundational revelation of the Upanishads is encapsulated in the Sanskrit phrase tatvama asi, which translates to that thou art.
Meaning the Atman and the Brahman are not two different things. The localized awareness looking out of your eyes is fundamentally made of the exact same invisible principle that sustains the cosmos.
Exactly. And Buddhism approaches this same truth from a slightly different angle, largely bypassing the language of a creator entirely. They focus heavily on dharma, the natural law or principle governing reality.
But the most devastating philosophical tool Buddhism uses to dismantle the isolated self is the doctrine of pratityasamutpada, or dependent origination.
Let's break down the mechanics of dependent origination because it completely destroys the idea of a separate identity.
The logic is airtight. Dependent origination states that absolutely no phenomenon exists independently. Everything arises in dependence upon multiple causes and conditions.
Right.
Let's look at a human being. You exist because your parents existed. You are composed of food grown in soil, watered by rain, evaporated by the sun. Your thoughts are constructed from language invented by ancestors you never met, reacting to a culture you did not create.
So if you attempt to isolate the you from the sun, the soil, the ancestors, and the language, there's literally nothing left.
Nothing at all. This is the concept of emptiness, or sunyata, which doesn't mean life is a meaningless void. It means you are empty of an independent, isolated self. Because you are woven into the infinite web of causality, you are continuous with the entire universe.
You're the principle of existence manifesting as a local node.
Which is beautifully poetic. But what makes the source material so robust is that we don't have to rely solely on ancient mystics. The scientific and philosophical matrix corroborates this entirely through the lens of empirical inquiry.
Let's track the physics, because this is where the hard sciences start sounding like ancient scripture. Classical physics, driven by figures like Isaac Newton, was entirely dedicated to discovering the invisible laws that govern visible objects.
Newton didn't invent gravity. He discovered the mathematical language to describe the underlying principle.
And Albert Einstein took this further, revealing the deep structural principles of space-time. Einstein was famously aligned with the philosopher Baruch Spinoza, who argued for a universe of monism.
Right, the idea that God and nature are the exact same thing, deus ex natura.
Spinoza believed there is only one infinite substance, and everything we see is just a temporary modification of that one substance. Einstein spoke reverently of the harmony of natural law, viewing the universe as the manifestation of a profound rational intelligence.
But classical physics still believed in solid objects. It wasn't until quantum mechanics that the physical world truly dissolved into a principle. When we look at Werner Heisenberg and the uncertainty principle, the idea of a localized, fixed particle is destroyed.
Heisenberg showed that at the fundamental level, you cannot simultaneously know both the exact position and the exact momentum of a particle.
The more precisely you measure one, the less certainty you have about the other. This wasn't just a failure of measurement equipment. It revealed that reality at its core is not made of solid little billiard balls.
It is made of probabilities. matter dissolves into relationships and mathematical potentials.
Which perfectly maps to the idea that physical form is secondary and the invisible mathematical principle is primary. And we have to mention Erwin Schrödinger here.
Well, absolutely.
The pioneer of quantum wave mechanics was explicitly reading the Upanishads while formulating his theories. He recognized that the quantum dissolution of boundaries perfectly mirrored the Vedantic concept that multiplicity is an illusion and only the underlying oneness is real.
But the physicist who brings us closest to Bandra's specific concept is David Bohm. We need to spend some time on Bohm's theory of the implicate and explicate order, because it provides the ultimate scientific analogy for this entire deep dive.
Let's go deep into Bohm.
Bohm was dissatisfied with the fragmented way quantum mechanics viewed the universe. He proposed a holistic model of reality. He suggested that the world we see, the world of separate objects, passing time, and physical bodies, is the explicate order.
It is the unfolded visible reality.
Yes, but this explicate order is constantly emerging out of and collapsing back into a deeper, invisible, undivided wholeness called the implicate order.
And Bohm used this incredible practical analogy to explain how information can be unfolded invisibly into a system. The glycerin cylinder.
Yeah, explain that one.
Imagine two concentric glass cylinders with the space between them filled with thick, clear glycerin. You place a single drop of black ink into the glycerin. If you turn the outer cylinder, the ink drop gets stretched and smeared until it is completely invisible and folded into the clear glycerin.
It looks like the ink is completely gone.
But the order, the information of that ink drop is still perfectly preserved within the system.
Exactly, because if you turn the cylinder backward in the exact reverse motion, the ink gathers back together and the distinct black drop reappears.
Bohm argued that the entire physical universe operates like this. Elementary particles and, by extension, human beings are constantly unfolding out of the invisible implicate order, becoming visible in the explicate order, and folding back in.
The true reality is the underlying hollow movement, the principle of the whole.
Bohm's implicate order is the precise scientific equivalent of Bandra's divine creative principle. The visible human is the explicate ink drop, but the underlying reality is the invisible implicate glycerin.
And this pattern recognition isn't just limited to physics. When we shift lenses to psychology, we see the exact same search for invisible organizing principles.
Carl Jung is the prime example here. Jung realized that the human mind isn't just a blank slate shaped by random experiences. He discovered the collective unconscious, a deep layer of the psyche shared by all humanity.
And within this layer are archetypes. But archetypes aren't inherited biological memories or specific images, right? They are structural principles.
Exactly. An archetype is like a dry riverbed. It has no water of its own, but it dictates exactly how the water will flow when it rains. Jung saw that our psychological development, our myths, and our dreams are governed by invisible, underlying principles that shape human consciousness across all cultures.
Similarly, Abraham Maslow mapped out principles of human growth and self-actualization, demonstrating that human potential unfolds according to a deeper structural order.
And wrapping up the philosophical matrix, classical thinkers have been hammering this point for millennia. Plato argued that the physical world is just a shadow of eternal, invisible forms or principles.
Aristotle posited the unmoved mover, the ultimate principle that sets all cosmic motion into effect without moving itself.
Plotinus spoke of the One, the infinite formless source from which all differentiated reality emanates.
The historical evidence is overwhelming. What we see here is not a series of isolated guesses. It is a universal chorus.
Yeah, the mystics, the quantum physicists, the psychologists, and the philosophers are all looking through completely different instruments, but they are all staring at the exact same invisible metaphetical principle.
Which brings us to the profound conclusion of this deep dive.
Right.
If we synthesize everything we have covered, the reality of who you are completely transformed.
Yeah, it really does.
You are not the physical body. Biology proves your flesh and bone is a flowing river of cellular turnover. You are not your atoms. Astrophysics proves you are a temporary, borrowed mosaic of billions of years old stardust forged in dying suns.
You are not your thoughts or your personality. Phenomenological reduction proves those are merely passing applications observed by a deeper, silent kernel of awareness.
When you strip away everything that is not you, what remains is not an isolated person. What remains is the divine creative principle.
You are the underlying intelligence of the universe, organizing itself into a complex biological structure, developing a nervous system, and opening a pair of eyes so that it can witness its own creation.
You are the implicate order, temporarily experiencing the explicate order. It is the ultimate cosmic loop. The universe, through you, is trying to figure itself out.
It is a staggering realization that reorients your entire relationship with existence.
And as we close, we want to leave you, the listener, with one final, provocative thought to carry with you today. It is a practical application of everything we've just discussed.
If what we have explored today is true, if every single person on this planet is not a separate, isolated ego, but is actually a temporary, localized, fruiting body of the exact same underlying divine creative principle,
Looking out through a different set of aging stardust eyes.
how does that radically reframe your next interaction with a complete stranger? Whether it is the barista handing you coffee, the person cutting you off in traffic, or a family member you are arguing with.
When you look into their eyes, are you fundamentally just the universe, looking directly back at itself?
The source encountering the source, wearing different masks, that is a paradigm shift that changes how you walk through the world.
Thank you for joining us on this expansive deep dive. Keep questioning the boundaries of your reality. Keep looking beneath the surface, and remember, you are not just in the universe, you are the universe. Until next time.